What's up, guys? Hyperbits here. So today I'm going to be showing you guys 5 techniques or 5 methodologies that involve using reverses to basically add details to your music, right? To add intricacies, to add perhaps a bit of energy and movement, or even just a splash, right, of like creativity. Personally, I'm just a huge fan of using reverses in my music. I mean, they sound really cool, but it's a great way to put a personal spin on something, and they're still really current, right? They're super in right now, and it's something you'll hear across multiple genres in electronic music. Definitely future bass, future house, and if you're subtle with some of these reverse techniques, like it's literally found in everywhere, every genre, everywhere across electronic music. So let's do this. Number 1, creating reverse melodies. So let's assume you've spent a considerable amount of time creating a melody. Here's just a really quick and cool, creative way to use reverses to add some variation and change things up a bit. So let's see what we're working with. First thing you want to do is just duplicate this channel and duplicate the MIDI. This is just so that we don't alter the original melody. We want to kind of preserve that as we tweak this. I'm going to double click this MIDI region, pulls up the piano roll. I'm going to select all the MIDI, go to Functions, MIDI Transform, Reverse Position. And since we've already got the MIDI selected, I'm just going to click Operate Only. By first glance, it seems like the MIDI disappeared, but that's just based on the position of where we exported the MIDI to. You can tweak that, or you can just drag this MIDI region over, and we've got our original pluck melody, but backwards, or played in reverse. And honestly, I mean, this isn't really that cool on its own, right? Like, you could potentially be inspired by this, maybe find some cool ideas out of this, but essentially it's just your melody played backwards, which probably isn't going to sound that great. But what we can do from here is now just bounce in place or export to audio or print, depending on what your terminology is. And once we've got this in audio, we can then click reverse, and what we're left with is our original melody, but played backwards. Let's check this out. And in the mix. Right, so this could sound pretty cool. You're kind of left with a bunch of creative options here as to how you want to use this. Like, you could play it on its own for sure. That's one option. Another thing you could do is start chopping this up maybe, and I don't know, placing some of these hits kind of right before some of the other notes or the other transients. It's kind of up to you. You can kind of, do what you want here. Maybe get a bit creative with it and see what happens. But it's really easy to chop up because it's all kind of in place already. Now, one little quick bonus tip once you've got, because this can get super cluttered. Let's just see how this sounds right now. That sounds pretty cool. One little quick bonus tip that I like to do sometimes is just throw on something like an auto panner, or I'll pull up Soundtoys Pan Man. And sometimes I just like these reverses to be all in different places, right? Because electronic music is very predictable. So if we get like some randomness and some movement, maybe across the stereo image, having all these reverses play in different spots, we could set this to a rhythm or a rhythmic step. It'll be in the tempo of the track, which is right now it's in 128. And let's just have like a pretty wide width right here, and then rhythmically, this kind of guarantees that it'll be in a different position every time. So let's just see what that sounds like. Yeah, that sounds really cool. All right, so number 2, reverse reverb with Logic's Space Designer. So this technique is going to be super simple and straightforward. This is almost more of a creativity and workflow tip than anything else, and it's specific to Logic users. But basically, Logic's convolution reverb right here, Space Designer, it has a reverse button. So instead of having to manually print your reverb tails and then reverse them, sometimes this reverse button is just a cool way to spark some creative atmospheres and cool tonal differences in your melody. Again, a lot of people probably know about this button, but if you don't, this is something that should 100% be in your workflow, and at least something that you can kind of experiment around with. So let me play this quick little piano melody with and without the reverse. This is without. I'll turn this guy on. Again, very easy trick, but something that can be super powerful and also be used in subtle ways at the same time. All right, so number 3, mapping reverses to a sampler, which in other words, lets you manipulate any sample you have on your computer as if it was a synth, and we're gonna do that kind of with reverse sounds. So before we actually do that, this is a sample I downloaded off of Splice. It's from the Bright Lights vocal pack. Basically, I'm just gonna load this into a sampler. So I'm gonna right click, convert to new sampler, trigger note range. This sample is in D, so we can leave it right here. Gonna pull up the EXS, click on edit, and first thing we're gonna do is actually just increase the keynote range. And this lets us play the sample across the entire keyboard. Which already by itself is kind of cool, right? Like we could probably throw that into or use that with our previous melody and come up with some pretty cool things. Let me just give this some reverb to smooth it out. Right, that's pretty cool, but we could also play these in reverse, right? Just by selecting that reverse button right there. Maybe be a bit more ambient with it, kind of, you know, a different vibe right there. But what if you wanted to play this melody kind of forwards and backwards, like where you wanted some of these notes to be forwards and some of them to be in reverse? Like let's just say we wanted this first note, it is an F4. We wanted that first one to be in reverse, but everything else to be played forward. You can actually undo this note range. Let's just go back to the default, what it was at D3. And we're gonna map this out one by one. And we can kind of keep selecting these blocks. You can now individually go in and select the notes that you want to be played in reverse. So what was that one? We said it was an F4. So let's find that. So we're gonna reverse that. Again, pretty cool effect and a cool way to just play around with some reverse synths or synth shots and some forward synth shots as well. All right, so moving right along, number 4, reverse reverb with stereo movement. So most producers are familiar with the reverse reverb trick. It's just a great way to introduce an important lead or prominent sound in the mix. Most commonly, it's done with vocals, right? But it can also be done with lead synths, piano chords, big bass sounds, really anything that you want to introduce via a long reversed reverb tail. And all I'm going to be showing you here is how to do that reverse reverb trick with just an extra bit of swagger, kind of like by introducing a little bit of movement. So real quick, let's create that initial reverb tail. I'm just going to be taking the first note from our prior melody here, and let's throw on some Valhalla reverb. We're going to throw on a ton of decay, really long reverb. Let's bounce this in place. I'm going to extend it, and I'm actually going to cut it off right up until the end of that initial note that we were working with, just to guarantee that we're only working with wetness or just working with the reverb. And then I can reverse that, and now we've got our classic reverse reverb technique, right? So this is nothing new. I feel like everyone has kind of worked with this at one point or another. But something cool that you can do is throwing on some sort of a movement plugin. So in this case, I'm going to use the tremolo plugin, but you could do this with an auto panner. You could do this with really anything that creates stereo width that you can automate. Now, I'm going to go in here and automate the rate. So at its highest point, it's going to be 1/64th, and at its lowest point, it'll be 1/1. And now what we're going to hear is this movement just going, basically changing and moving across the stereo spectrum. And it's just, again, a cool way to introduce some additional movement. Right? That's a That's kind of another trick that you've probably heard in most productions. And now let's hear how that sounds across the whole thing. Again, a really simple but cool trick, and just a way to get a little more out of probably some things that you're already doing. All right, so number 5, adding groove and energy with reverses. Anyone who follows me or follows the free content that I give out or attends my webinars knows that I'm a huge fan and huge proponent of movement. Sometimes I view composing and writing on a digital computer really as just an effort to humanize everything as much as possible. Like, how can we make what we're writing digitally on a computer sound more human or more real and essentially less perfect, right? Now, there's tons of things that we can do to accomplish that, but one little thing I've noticed is to just use reverses. Like, nothing is more boring than to just write a melody, play it out with no panning, no delay, no sidechain, all those things that make your music move and come alive. And I've noticed that reverses can really aid a lot in this. So let's just check out an old project of mine. We're kind of switching gears here from the project that I've been using. This is just an old project of mine, and I'll show you a few cases or examples of reverses for added energy, for added groove, whatever. And it kind of starts right off in the intro. I've got kind of this offbeat bass, which just hits once, kind of introducing the sound. Pretty cool, but it'd be a lot less cool if it was just this. Still works, but I think that reverse, definitely adds a bit to it. Later on in the drop, these are pretty hidden and relatively subtle, but they're definitely adding some movement, some little subtleties that I think make this bass look just a bit more interesting. And as the song progresses, we've got these kind of alternate plucks that come in, and these are definitely driven by some movement by these reverses. I'll play it in the mix. So again, all of these are relatively subtle. These are a bit more straightforward and out front in the mix, but the job that they're doing is just creating that energy, that additional movement. Again, something that I think is just somewhat underutilized in composition. And then a kind of more subtle technique here in the break section. I even reverse in this kind of live guitar sound. Right? Play the whole thing. So hopefully this helps you guys. Have fun with these techniques, and I'll be back soon with more.